an original narrative, created especially for Shadows of Love. Olivia Parker squinted against the evening rain, tilting her head toward a sleek black Maserati's window to fix her lipstick. The reflection shifted unexpectedly. Dark eyes watching her from inside, intense and curious. She froze, makeup forgotten, as the tinted window lowered with mechanical precision to reveal a man whose face belonged on wanted posters rather than charity galas. Adrian Castellano, the whispered name attached to rumors of empires built and abandoned, studied her with a careful assessment of someone who'd spent a lifetime measuring threats. Rain purled on her eyelashes as their gazes locked, a strange intimacy forming between strangers on a rain-slicked Manhattan street. Neither spoke for 3 heartbeats until he broke the silence with a voice that carried the weight of unspoken histories. "Do you need better light?" The question hung between them. Simple words somehow laden with something far more complicated than courtesy. Olivia Parker hadn't planned to use a stranger's car as her mirror. She'd been rushing to meet her colleague at the Metropolitan Museum's side entrance when the skies opened up, forcing her beneath the nearest awning. The compact mirror in her purse had cracked that morning. 7 years of bad luck, her grandmother would have said, leaving her with limited options for checking her appearance before the board meeting. The black Maserati idling at the curb had seemed like a convenient solution. Its tinted windows offered just enough reflection for her to fix her lipstick, smudged from her dash through the rain. She hadn't expected anyone to be inside the vehicle, let alone watching her. When the window lowered, revealing the man inside, Olivia's embarrassment quickly transformed into something else entirely. Recognition, perhaps. Not of his identity, but of something in his gaze that mirrored her own careful observation of the world. "Do you need better light?" he asked, his voice cultured but with a roughness at its edges, like expensive sandpaper. "No, Olivia stepped back, rain dampening her shoulders. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize anyone was in the car." His eyes, dark, almost black in the dim evening light, studied her with a precision that felt both intrusive and oddly familiar. "No harm done. Most people look right through me these days. Being noticed is refreshing." The statement carried weight beyond its simple meaning. Before Olivia could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from her supervisor. "Late for the meeting. Again." "I have to go," she said, already stepping away. "Thank you for not calling security." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I prefer to handle matters personally." Something about the way he said it made her pause, but the insistent buzz of her phone pulled her attention away. With a quick nod, she hurried toward the museum's side entrance, feeling his eyes following her until she disappeared inside. Adrian Castellano watched her go, allowing himself the luxury of curiosity, a dangerous indulgence for a man in his position. 3 years into his self-imposed exile from the family business, and still he couldn't shake the habit of cataloging details. Her quick, assessing glance, the careful way she held herself, the ID badge partially visible beneath her rain jacket, museum staff, restoration department. His driver, Marco, cleared his throat from the front seat. "Sir, the foundation meeting starts in 20 minutes. Adrian nodded, raising the window. "Let's go. I've kept them waiting long enough." The Metropolitan Museum of Art's conservation wing operated 2 floors below, where tourists admired finished masterpieces. Here, in the climate-controlled laboratories and studios, Olivia Parker spent her days peeling back layers of history, one careful solvent swab at a time. "The board's getting impatient about the Venetian collection," said Daniel Chen, her supervisor at the police provenance unit that partnered with the museum. "They want authentication completed by the end of the month." Olivia frowned, setting down her micro spatula. That's half the time we usually take. Apparently, there's a major donor interested in funding the entire wing if we can confirm the collection's legitimacy. Daniel handed her a folder. The donor's representative will be visiting next week. Try to have something substantial by then. Who's the donor? Olivia asked, scanning the paperwork. Anonymous, of course. Some foundation based in Switzerland. Daniel shrugged. The usual arrangement for people with too much money and too many questions about where it came from. Art restoration had taught Olivia patience and precision. Her work with the provenance unit had taught her skepticism. Every painting had two histories, the one visible on canvas and the one hidden in ownership records, shipping manifests, and gallery transfers. Sometimes those histories contradicted each other. Sometimes they revealed crimes. That evening, as Olivia worked late examining infrared scans of a suspected forgery, her mind drifted to the man in the car. There had been something in his eyes, a guarded awareness that reminded her of her own careful scrutiny of artwork, the look of someone who could see beneath surfaces. What she didn't know then was that Adrian Castellano had already researched her name from the badge glimpsed beneath her coat, that he knew she worked with the police provenance unit investigating art with questionable histories, that her specialty in Renaissance restoration put her directly in the path of his carefully constructed redemption. Adrian sat in his penthouse that same evening, a glass of scotch untouched beside him, as he reviewed the Foundation's latest acquisition report. The Castellano Family Foundation, named for a grandfather whose hands had been cleaner than his own, served as his public face now. Art patronage, historical preservation, educational scholarships. The acceptable hobbies of a wealthy European businessman who had left his family's shipping empire for more refined pursuits. Only a handful of people knew the truth, that Adrian had walked away from the family business when he could no longer ignore what moved through those shipping containers, that his exile wasn't a choice, but a necessity when rival families had used his crisis of conscience to stage a hostile takeover. Now he lived in the shadows between worlds. No longer the Mafia prince, not yet the legitimate businessman. His penance paid in anonymous donations and careful distance from the people who had once feared his name, until a woman used his car window as a mirror, and for a moment he saw himself clearly reflected in her eyes. The crate arrived at the museum's loading dock at precisely 9:17 a.m. on a Tuesday, accompanied by armed guards and a temperature-controlled transport vehicle. Standard procedure for valuable artwork, but the level of security suggested something extraordinary. 16th century Venetian port scene, Daniel explained as they supervised the unpacking in the secure examination room. Attributed to Canaletto's workshop, though the dating is questionable. Olivia watched as the painting emerged from its protective wrapping. It depicted a harbor scene with merchant ships, their sails billowing against a stormy sky. The detail was exquisite. Sailors moving cargo, merchants negotiating, aristocrats observing from gondolas. "What's the provenance issue?" she asked, already pulling on her gloves. Paper trail gets murky around World War II. Resurfaced in a private collection in Argentina in the 70s, then Switzerland in the 90s. Daniel handed her the file. The current owner wants authentication before donating it to the museum. And the rush? Tax purposes, supposedly. End of fiscal year approaching. Olivia nodded, unconvinced. Tax deadlines didn't explain armed guards or the board's unusual interest. Something else was at play. Initial examination revealed nothing suspicious. The canvas, pigments, and aging consistent with the claimed period. It wasn't until the third day, when Olivia was examining the frame under ultraviolet light, that she discovered the anomaly. "Daniel, look at this." She pointed to a thin seam along the frame's inner edge. There's something embedded in the wood. Careful extraction revealed a glass plate negative, the kind used in early photography. When held up to the light, it showed a group of men standing on a dock similar to the one in the painting. The image was faded, but clear enough to make out faces, including one that seemed oddly familiar. "We need to digitize this," Daniel said. "It could help establish the painting's journey." The digital enhancement revealed details invisible to the naked eye. A shipping manifest partially visible on a clipboard, a company name on a warehouse, and, most intriguingly, a reflection in a window behind the men. A reflection of someone taking the photograph. Someone whose face Olivia recognized immediately. The man from the car. Younger, perhaps in his 20s, but unmistakable. The same intense eyes, the same careful posture. The timestamp on the negative dated it to 15 years ago. "I know him," she said before she could stop herself. Daniel looked up sharply. "Who?" "I mean, I've seen him before." Olivia hesitated, suddenly wary of revealing too much. "At museum events." Before Daniel could press further, his phone rang. After a brief conversation, he turned to Olivia with a frown. "The donor's representative is visiting tomorrow instead of next week. Board wants you to present your findings personally." "We've barely started the authentication process." "Just share what you have so far. Apparently, they're very interested in your methodology." That night, Olivia stayed late, comparing the photograph to news archives. The search yielded nothing concrete until she expanded to international sources, where she found a single mention in an Italian newspaper. "Castellano Shipping Air attends Port Authority Gala." Adrian Castellano. The name triggered a cascade of vague associations. Whispered rumors of family connections to organized crime, a sudden withdrawal from public life, reinvention as a philanthropist. Nothing concrete, nothing proven, but enough to raise questions about why his younger self appeared in a hidden photograph connected to a painting with questionable provenance. The museum fundraiser the following evening was crowded with Manhattan's elite, champagne flowing as freely as the promises of donations. Olivia, uncomfortable in her formal attire, stood near the Renaissance display, rehearsing her presentation. "The reflection is the most interesting part, don't you think?" She turned to find Adrian Castellano beside her, impeccable in a tailored suit, studying the digital reproduction of the glass negative displayed on a nearby screen. "Mr. Castellano." She kept her voice neutral. "I didn't realize you were the foundation representative. I prefer to handle important matters personally." The same phrase he'd used during their first encounter, now carrying new weight. "You've made remarkable progress with the authentication." "We've only just begun," she replied carefully. "The photograph raises more questions than it answers." His eyes met hers, and for a moment, she glimpsed something beyond the cultivated facade. Wariness, perhaps, or resignation. Questions about the painting's history, or about mine. Before she could respond, the museum director approached, effusive with praise for Adrian's foundation and its generous support. The moment of honesty evaporated, replaced by social niceties and veiled expectations. Later, as Olivia presented her preliminary findings to the board and foundation representatives, she felt Adrian's gaze following her every movement. She deliberately avoided mentioning the reflection in the photograph, focusing instead on the technical aspects of authentication. When the presentation concluded, the board chairman cleared his throat. "The Castellano Foundation has expressed interest in funding a dedicated provenance research position. Ms. Parker, They've specifically requested you lead the investigation into this collection. Olivia glanced at Adrian, who remained expressionless. That's generous, but our unit follows standard protocols. We can't guarantee results by a specific deadline. Of course, Adrian interjected smoothly. The Foundation values thoroughness over expediency. We merely wish to support the pursuit of truth, however inconvenient it might prove. The statement hung in the air between them. A challenge, an invitation, or perhaps a warning. As the meeting adjourned, Adrian approached her once more. The painting shows a port where my family once operated, he said quietly. Whatever you discover in your investigation, would appreciate hearing it from you first. Is that a request or a condition of funding? His smile didn't reach his eyes. Consider it a professional courtesy between people who recognize reflections for what they truly reveal. The museum after hours transformed from public showcase to private sanctuary. Olivia often stayed late, preferring the quiet solitude of the conservation lab to the chaos of daytime operations. 3 nights after the fundraiser, she found herself alone with the Venetian port painting, meticulously documenting each brushstroke under specialized lighting. You work as if someone is watching over your shoulder. She startled, turning to find Adrian Castellano standing in the doorway. Security should have notified her of a visitor, especially after hours. Major donors have certain privileges, he explained, reading her expression. Though I rarely exercise them. What can I help you with, Mr. Castellano? Olivia maintained professional distance, though her heart raced with both caution and curiosity. I thought I might help you instead. He approached slowly, respecting the invisible boundary around her workspace. The port in that painting was controlled by my family for 3 generations. The photograph you found, I remember when it was taken. Olivia studied him, weighing professional obligation against intuition. You understand, I'm required to report everything I find to the provenance unit. I'm counting on your thoroughness. Adrian's gaze fell on the painting. Some histories deserve to be uncovered, regardless of who they implicate. Something in his tone, a resignation, perhaps even relief, made her reconsider her initial wariness. Why don't you just tell me what I'll find? Because a truth freely given has less value than one earned through effort. He met her eyes. And because you wouldn't believe me without evidence. Their conversation that night established a pattern. Adrian would appear after hours, ostensibly to check on the Foundation's investment. Each time, he offered fragments of context, shipping routes, family connections, historical details that couldn't be found in any archive. Never direct answers, but breadcrumbs leading toward them. Olivia found herself drawn to these encounters, to the careful dance between revelation and concealment. Adrian Castellano carried himself like a man who had spent a lifetime guarding secrets, yet now seemed determined to let certain ones escape. Your family wasn't just in shipping, she said one evening, 2 weeks into their unusual collaboration. The manifests I found show art moving through your ports during periods when export was restricted. Adrian nodded, unsurprised. My grandfather began as a legitimate businessman. My father expanded into areas that proved more profitable. And you? His smile was humorless. I inherited complications I didn't fully understand until it was too late to extricate myself cleanly. As their conversations deepened, Olivia discovered in Adrian a moral code that, while bent, had never fully broken. He spoke of boundaries he wouldn't cross, of the moment he'd walked away from the family business, rather than participate in human trafficking operations proposed by rival families. They called it diversification, he said, disgust evident in his voice. I called it a line I wouldn't cross. My departure created a power vacuum that those same rivals were happy to fill. So now you restore art instead of smuggling it? Olivia asked, unable to keep the skepticism from her voice. Restoration, patronage, preservation, yes. Penance comes in many forms, Miss Parker. Olivia, she corrected automatically, surprising herself with the invitation to familiarity. Olivia, he repeated, her name in his voice somehow both foreign and familiar. The first threat arrived by email 3 weeks into the investigation, a simple message from an anonymous account. Stop authentication or face consequences. Olivia reported it to security, but continued her work, assuming it was a standard intimidation tactic from someone connected to the painting's questionable past. The second threat appeared on her windshield, more specific. The Castellano project will end your career. Final warning. When she mentioned it to Adrian during one of their evening conversations, his reaction was immediate and fierce, a glimpse of the man who had once commanded respect through fear. I'll arrange protection, he said, already reaching for his phone. No. Olivia's refusal was firm. I don't need your security detail monitoring me. I need the truth about this painting and why someone doesn't want it authenticated. Adrian's hesitation was brief but noticeable. The painting itself isn't important. It's what it represents, a paper trail. The manifests, the shipping records, the transfer documents. They connect certain families to art that disappeared during wartime. Including yours? Including mine, he acknowledged. But also families who would prefer their current legitimate facades remain unquestioned. As Olivia delved deeper into the painting's history, she uncovered inconsistencies in the documentation, certificates of authenticity with mismatched dates, export permits with impossible routing information. A trail deliberately obscured by someone with extensive resources. She shared her findings with Daniel, who grew increasingly concerned about the high-profile nature of the investigation. The board is getting nervous about the direction this is taking, he warned. These are powerful people you're potentially implicating. Powerful people who may have trafficked looted art, Olivia countered. Isn't that exactly what our unit is supposed to investigate? The betrayal, when it came, blindsided them both. A forged affidavit appeared in the art press, allegedly from Olivia's department, claiming the painting had already been authenticated despite known provenance issues. The implication of professional misconduct was clear, designed to discredit both Olivia and the entire provenance unit before they could release their actual findings. Daniel was called to an emergency board meeting, leaving Olivia alone in the lab with the painting and her scattered research. When her phone rang with an unknown number, she answered without thinking. They're moving to destroy the evidence. Adrian's voice was tense, urgent. My lieutenant has been selling information to the Varese family. The original shipping logs from the painting's transport are stored at the harbor warehouse. They're scheduled for routine disposal tomorrow morning. How do you know this? A pause. Because I still maintain certain connections for precisely this type of situation. Olivia made her decision quickly. What do you suggest? Let me protect you, he said, his voice softening, at least until this is resolved. I have a counter-proposal, Olivia replied. Instead of protection, offer partnership. Help me recover those documents tonight, and I'll ensure the truth comes to light, whatever it reveals about your past. The silence that followed stretched long enough that she thought he might refuse. Finally, he spoke again, his voice carrying a note she hadn't heard before. Something like hope. I'll pick you up in 20 minutes. Wear something dark. The harbor at night breathed with a different rhythm than its daytime bustle. Slower, more deliberate, punctuated by the distant clank of machinery and the gentle lapping of water against concrete. Adrian's car moved silently along the perimeter road, headlights extinguished for the final approach to the warehouse district. Security rotates every 30 minutes, he explained, consulting his phone. We have a 15-minute window between shifts at the eastern entrance. Olivia nodded, adrenaline sharpening her senses. She had crossed a line by coming here, from investigator to active participant. The professional distance she had maintained throughout her career had dissolved the moment she stepped into Adrian's car. Why are you doing this? She asked suddenly. You could walk away, start fresh somewhere else. Adrian's hands tightened on the steering wheel. I tried that once. It doesn't work. The past follows unless you face it directly. He glanced at her. Besides, I've spent 3 years building a foundation that actually does good. I won't let Marco's betrayal destroy that. Your lieutenant, you trusted him? With my life once. The bitterness in Adrian's voice was palpable. Family isn't always blood. They parked behind an abandoned shipping office, the dark bulk of Warehouse 37 looming ahead. Adrian retrieved a small backpack from the trunk, containing gloves, flashlights, and a slim case of tools whose purpose Olivia decided not to question. The archives are in the administrative section, 2nd floor, he said, checking his watch. Security cameras run on a separate circuit from the main power. You've done this before, Olivia observed. His smile was grim. In another life. The 15-minute window proved accurate. They slipped through an employee entrance during the guard change, Adrian disabling the door alarm with practiced efficiency. Inside, the warehouse stretched cavernous and shadowed, filled with crates and shipping containers awaiting processing. This way, Adrian whispered, leading her toward a metal staircase. The administrative offices upstairs were locked, but yielded quickly to Adrian's expertise. In the records room, row upon row of filing cabinets stood like sentinels guarding paper memories. We need shipping manifests from 15 years ago, Olivia said, scanning the labels. Specifically anything connected to art transport through Italian ports. They worked methodically, the beam of their flashlights cutting through darkness as they photographed documents page by page. The manifests revealed what Olivia had suspected. A sophisticated operation moving artwork of questionable provenance through a series of shell companies, all eventually connecting back to 3 family names: Castellano, Verezi, and Montero. Your family worked with the Verezis? Olivia asked, photographing a particularly damning customs declaration. An alliance of convenience, Adrian replied, his voice tight. Until it wasn't. A noise from the corridor froze them both. Footsteps, too early for the scheduled patrol. Adrian motioned Olivia behind a cabinet, positioning himself between her and the door, his body language shifting subtly into something more dangerous, more alert. The footsteps passed. Adrian relaxed marginally, but kept his voice low. We need to finish and leave. Now. They worked faster, Olivia's fingers flying over documents while Adrian kept watch. Among the shipping records, she found something unexpected. A handwritten ledger with names and payments, including several museum board members. This connects everything, she whispered, photographing each page. The painting, the hidden photograph, the forged affidavit. It's all part of the same cover-up. Adrian nodded grimly. The Verezis have been buying influence for decades. Museums, galleries, auction houses, anywhere they needed to legitimize their collection. And you? His eyes met hers in the dim light. I enabled it. Then I walked away. Now I'm trying to make it right. They finished documenting the evidence just as the security patrol returned. Adrian led them through a service corridor to an emergency exit, triggering the alarm as they escaped into the night. By the time security responded, they were already driving away, the harbor lights receding behind them. Rain began to fall as they crossed the bridge back to Manhattan, a gentle patter against the windshield that seemed to wash away the tension of the past hours. Neither spoke until Adrian unexpectedly pulled over beside a small stone chapel nestled between modern buildings. "I need a moment," he said simply. Inside, the chapel was empty save for rows of votive candles, their flames dancing in the draft from the door. Adrian moved to the front, his footsteps echoing on the stone floor. Olivia watched as he lit a candle, his movements reverent despite their circumstances. "For Marco?" she asked, joining him. Adrian shook his head. "For a dock worker named Emilio Vasquez. He discovered what was really in some of our shipments 15 years ago. He was going to report it." He paused. "I didn't order what happened to him, but I didn't prevent it either. His family never knew the truth." The confession hung between them, raw and unexpected. Olivia found herself lighting a candle of her own, placing it beside Adrian's. "The photograph in the painting," she said slowly. "It was taken the day Emilio disappeared, wasn't it?" Adrian nodded. "The photographer was a journalist investigating the shipping irregularities. He disappeared as well, but not before hiding the negative where he thought it would eventually be found. In a painting of the very port where it happened." "Poetic justice," Adrian murmured. In the flickering candlelight, the careful distance between them seemed to dissolve. Olivia found herself studying Adrian's face, the lines of regret etched around his eyes, the set of his jaw that spoke of determination rather than defiance. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we make a decision." Adrian turned to face her fully. "We have enough evidence to expose everything. The art trafficking, the museum connections, my family's involvement, the Varezzi's current operations. But once we do, there's no going back for either of us." "Would that be so terrible?" Olivia asked. "Going forward instead of back?" Something shifted in Adrian's expression, a softening, a surrender. "I've spent 3 years living in shadows, trying to atone without confession. Perhaps it's time for both." "At what cost?" "For me? Everything I've built since leaving the family. For you? Possibly your career, given the museum board's involvement." His hand found hers in the dim light, a touch so careful it barely registered. "I won't ask you to make that sacrifice." Olivia looked down at their hands, then back to his face. "You're not asking. I'm choosing." Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the chapel's stained glass windows like a heartbeat. In that moment of decision, with evidence of decades of corruption stored on their phones and the weight of consequence heavy between them, Olivia recognized the truth that had been building since that first reflected glance. Some connections, once made, couldn't be severed without losing something essential. "We expose everything," she said firmly, "regardless of personal cost." Adrian's relief was visible, a burden lifted after years of carrying it alone. "Together, then." "Together," she agreed. And in the sacred quiet of the chapel, surrounded by the light of confession and forgiveness, the distance between exile and belonging no longer seemed insurmountable. Dawn broke over the harbor in shades of pearl and gold, the early light catching on windows and water alike. The press hall, hastily arranged in an old shipping office, buzzed with journalists summoned by an anonymous tip, promising revelations about one of the art world's most prestigious collections. Olivia stood at the podium, her evidence organized and irrefutable. Behind her sat Adrian, his face composed despite the gravity of what was about to unfold. They had worked through the night preparing, organizing documents, connecting evidence to testimony, ensuring that what they presented couldn't be dismissed or buried. 15 years ago, Olivia began, her voice steady. A painting depicting Venice's Grand Canal was transported through this very port, accompanied by documentation claiming it was a recent discovery from a private Italian collection. That documentation was falsified. She proceeded methodically, presenting the shipping manifests, the hidden photograph, the connections to museum board members who had facilitated the authentication of questionable artwork in exchange for donations and personal gifts. This wasn't an isolated incident, she continued. It was part of a systematic operation involving 3 family organizations and dozens of cultural institutions. The evidence I'm providing today connects these operations to at least 37 paintings currently hanging in major museums worldwide. When she finished, Adrian rose from his seat and approached the podium. The room fell silent, recognition dawning on several faces as he took his position beside Olivia. "My name is Adrian Castellano," he began, his voice carrying the weight of his decision. "For 20 years, I was involved in the operations Ms. Parker has described. The Castellano shipping interests, under my father's direction and later my own, provided transportation and documentation for artwork of questionable provenance. His testimony was precise and damning, naming names, dates, methods of operation. He implicated himself alongside the Verezzi and Montero families, detailing how they had used museums and galleries to launder both art and reputation. I walked away from these operations 3 years ago," Adrian continued. "Since then, I have attempted to make amends through anonymous donations and the establishment of the Castellano Foundation. These efforts, while sincere, do not erase my responsibility for what came before." As questions erupted from the assembled press, Olivia watched Adrian's face, the relief beneath the resignation, the unburdening that came with truth finally spoken aloud. Whatever came next, this moment of honesty had already transformed him. The consequences unfolded over the following weeks with the inexorable logic of falling dominoes. The museum board was dissolved. Several members facing criminal charges for fraud and conspiracy. The provenance unit received emergency funding and expanded authority, though Daniel was quietly moved to another department, his reluctance to pursue powerful donors deemed a liability in the new era of transparency. For Adrian, the reckoning was both public and private. The Castellano Foundation was placed in trust, its operations continuing under independent oversight, while its founder faced legal proceedings. He pleaded guilty to reduced charges in exchange for testimony against the Verezzi and Montero organizations, accepting a suspended sentence, significant financial penalties, and a lifetime ban from the shipping industry. Olivia's career took an unexpected turn. Rather than facing professional ostracism, she found herself appointed to lead a new international task force dedicated to investigating art provenance across institutional boundaries. Her expertise, combined with her demonstrated integrity, made her the natural choice for a position that would once have seemed impossibly beyond her reach. They did not see each other during those tumultuous months. Adrian withdrew to his villa on the Italian coast, honoring the court's travel restrictions and avoiding the media frenzy that followed their revelations. Olivia immersed herself in her new responsibilities, expanding the investigation beyond what either of them had initially imagined. It was nearly 6 months later when a package arrived at the museum's conservation lab, addressed to Olivia personally. Inside was an antique mirror, its silver backing restored, but with a distinctive crack preserved rather than repaired. The accompanying note read simply, "Some reflections deserve to be remembered, even when they show us what we wish to forget." A. The mirror was installed in the museum's newly established Provenance Education Center, its plaque explaining its significance without mentioning names. Truth, like art, requires both preservation and restoration. This mirror reminds us that what we see depends entirely on where we stand. When Olivia finally saw Adrian again, it was on a pier at the harbor where their investigation had begun. Early morning mist hung over the water, shrouding the city behind them in gauzy indistinction. He looked different, the careful facade replaced by something more weathered but more genuine, his expensive suit exchanged for simple linen and cotton. "You're looking at the honest version," he said, noting her appraisal. "It turns out manual labor is its own form of restoration." "The villa gardens?" she asked, remembering his mention of the property's neglected grounds. "And the orchard beyond. My hands have never been cleaner, despite the dirt." They stood side by side, watching fishing boats navigate the morning harbor. The silence between them was comfortable, unburdened by the secrets that had once made every conversation a careful negotiation. Was it worth it? Olivia finally asked. "The truth, the consequences, all of it." Adrian turned to her, his eyes clear in the morning light. "Ask me again in 10 years. But today? Yes." When he reached for her, it wasn't with the hesitation of their chapel moment, but with the certainty of someone who had finally stepped fully into his own reflection. Their embrace was both acknowledgement and promise. Not of perfection, but of possibility. Not of escape, but of return. His kiss tasted of salt air and redemption, of endings transformed into beginnings. In the distance, the city was waking, unaware that two people on a misty pier had already begun a new day, long before dawn. 1 year later, Olivia stood before the Venetian port painting, now displayed with a new plaque detailing its complicated history. The museum had transformed its approach to provenance, featuring rather than hiding the complex journeys that brought art into its collection. Visitors now lingered before this particular piece, drawn to the story behind its creation and discovery. "Your work has changed how people see," said a familiar voice behind her. Olivia turned to find Adrian, his presence still commanding despite the humility he had embraced. The year had weathered him further. Sun-browned skin, silver threading more prominently through his dark hair. But the watchfulness in his eyes had softened into something approaching peace. "Not just my work," she replied. "Your testimony made it possible." They walked together through the gallery, comfortable in the rhythm they had established through monthly visits. Adrian's travel restrictions had eased, allowing him to divide his time between his coastal villa and occasional trips to New York, where the foundation's work continued under new leadership. "The Vasquez family received the final restitution payment," he told her as they paused before a Renaissance Madonna. "Their son starts university in the fall." Olivia nodded, understanding the significance. Emilio Vasquez's family had been the first beneficiaries of the Victim Compensation Fund established from the penalties assessed against the 3 families. Education for the children of those harmed. Adrian's insistence, his most personal atonement. "And the restoration project?" she asked. "The chapel renovations are complete. Local artisans, all properly documented and paid." His smile carried a hint of self-deprecation. I'm learning that honest work takes longer, but lasts better. Outside the museum, spring sunlight gilded the steps where they had first crossed paths. Olivia found herself studying Adrian's reflection in the glass doors. No longer the guarded exile, but a man gradually reclaiming himself from the shadows of his past. I received an offer from the International Art Crime Division, she said as they descended to the street. They want me to establish a permanent provenance verification protocol based on our investigation. Adrian's pride was evident. They couldn't choose. Better. It would mean more travel, including Italy. She let the implication hang between them, neither pushing nor retreating. The villa gardens are at their best in summer, he replied, his casual tone belied by the intensity of his gaze. The guest house overlooks the sea. Their relationship had evolved with deliberate care, neither rushing toward nor away from the connection that had formed in those fraught days of investigation. Professional collaboration had gradually yielded to personal understanding, respect deepening into something neither was quick to name, but both recognized as essential. As they walked through the park adjacent to the museum, Adrian stopped beside a small reflecting pool. The water's surface mirrored the sky above, clouds drifting across its stillness. I used to avoid reflections, he said quietly. Now I seek them out. Olivia understood. Every reflection offered a chance to reconcile the person one had been with the person one was becoming. Their shared journey had taught them both that truth, however painful, created possibilities that deception never could. Some reflections are worth returning to, she agreed, taking his hand. In the water before them, their joined reflection wavered and steadied. Two figures no longer separated by secrets or circumstance. Their futures not guaranteed, but possible in ways neither had imagined that rainy night when a car window became an unexpected mirror. Behind them, the city continued its ceaseless rhythm. Before them stretched paths still unwritten. Between them, fingers intertwined, existed the most honest reflection of all. That redemption, like restoration, required not the erasure of damage, but its integration into something more complete than what had come before.